Yeah, and you get into your comfort zone and you think you know things, but you don't.
So, Andrew, I don't know about you, but when I was coming up in the piping game as a kid, there were a few tunes that I remember showing up to my high school band room, getting out the pipes and hearing a more advanced player who had been there, who was, a senior, right? Over in the corner playing this wild tune. And I was like, what is that tune? Me excited about Minstrel Boy, right? Because I was tired of playing Scott and the Brave and now I was able to play Minstrel Boy.
Yes.
This kid's Sean is over there in the corner playing the Blue Cloud. I'm like, what is
Whoa.
that?
Yeah.
I remember the first time, and I think it was Mike Swan actually, that I heard somebody playing the Clumsy Lover, and it hit that high A section. That was the first time I'd ever heard that convention on bagpipes, where you use high A's to disappear and come
Hmm.
back in rhythmically. And of course, the holy grail for years for my friends and I
You
was
all
the
know
Hellbound
it.
Train.
Oh, the Hellbound Train. Okay. I thought you were gonna go with Clumsy
Oh,
Lover.
Pumpkin's Fancy, of course, right? That's a big one too, of course, yeah.
Oh yeah, Pumpkin's
But
Fancy. I think Itchy Fingers was
ooh,
maybe
Itchy
I'm
Fingers, heck yeah,
yeah,
that's another
yeah.
one.
Itchy Fingers was another
So
good one.
is this one thing I've never been sure about though, Andrew, is are those tunes indicative of a specific time period such that you could date when I was learning to play bagpipes by what the cool tunes were?
Yes. Yeah,
That's
or I
interesting.
think. Wait, what was the question?
Mm.
If
Are those is that if me listing those tunes, what were the cool tunes? Are those tunes specific to this tight little time period such that if I'm talking about those tunes as being cool to me as I was learning, that you could say, okay, you were learning between this year and this year because those were hot across the entire piping community. Not to say they're not hot now, still some of my favorite tunes, right? But is that the situation, or had these been cooler were they cool tunes before I came into it and remain cool? So you couldn't really date when I was learning to play when I talk about those tunes. Will a kid learning to play bagpipes today have the same experience with those same tunes as they come into piping?
right. It's a good question. Definitely a very interesting question. I think that those tunes, because, and the question is whether or not we'll continue to see that kind of thing. Is that
Yeah.
the question?
That is what I've been wondering about. I love Lincoln Hilton so much. I love hearing him play and watching him play,
Oh, I feel a
watching his
butt
finger work
coming.
and stuff.
Is there a butt
You knew that was
coming?
coming, huh?
You can always tell when
But
you're about to hear a big butt.
but honestly, I don't think I'll live long enough to ever be able to play a lot of his tunes,
Hmm.
maybe all of them. Where the Clumsy Lover is something I could get jazzed about and I could learn to play it. And I'm not disparaging Lincoln Hilton here. I'm just saying what I'm curious about is, has the age of the viral but playable tune become a thing of the past? And are the viral tunes in our community increasingly not playable for an average person like me? Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. I think that those tunes, I think your Itchy Fingers and your Clumsy Lover, and what else did we have? We had Blue Cloud. Oh, Steam Train to Malag. You can't forget about
Steam
that.
Train for sure. Both the
That is a
trains, the Steam
huge
Train
one.
and the Hellbound. Yeah,
And then
absolutely.
Hellbound Train is like on the edge playability, isn't it? For
Mhm.
the enthusiastic intermediate. It's on the
When
edge,
my
but
friends and
still
I
playable.
when my friends and I played it, we cut up the 3 parts so that I got all the easiest parts, right?
Right.
And that's part of what made it playable. My friends who were better than me, they took all the faster parts, and I took all the slower parts.
Interesting. Yeah. So then Hellbound Train was really cool. And then what else did we have? We had the Blue Cloud.
The Blue Cloud for
We
sure,
had the
yeah.
Mason's Apron, especially
Mason's
the
Apron,
with the
yeah.
little hand bit, right? That was a
Mhm.
thing for a
Yeah,
while.
gotta brush it. Yep.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I feel like Afternoon at the Green Monster was one of them as well. You know that
That's
tune?
one I never learned. Yeah, absolutely, very
But
cool, yeah, for
the
sure, but
third
not one I
part
learned.
goes, the third part is like the Coldplay part. You know that part?
I'd never heard it
Uh,
called that, but that makes a lot of sense, yeah.
so it's totally what it is. And I know the composer was, apologies, your name is slipping my mind. I can't remember, but I digress. I just remember being amazed how pervasive that tune was. Like everybody in the world played that tune.
Mhm.
Everybody. And it was a yeah, so that was a continuation. And then I have a couple of questions to follow up with you with. I kind of feel like the Air and B minor that SFU played
Oh,
in
yeah.
2004, and just the reprise thing in general, I feel like that is still something that kind of pervades. Do you think that's related to this?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. The reprise thing in particular, it seems like in that it's cool and I don't wanna make it sound like I'm saying it's cheap by saying it's trendy, but it definitely is it's trendy, right? It's
Sure.
a thing that keeps popping up, and it almost feels
So
like anybody who's anybody is gonna do that in their competition set. They're gonna have a little reprise, like, "Where's the reprise?" You're looking for it.
exactly. Or in some cases, it's like, "Oh, man, I know what's about to happen," and,
Yeah, you can feel it,
the
yeah.
commence eye roll, right? Um, and then, uh and then, I'm of the personal belief that it's like the crane kick, "When do well, no can defense," right? But it's not always done well, so
Yeah.
you gotta be a little bit careful. But the general vibe of the reprise was, we're gonna do something very simple, so that's Jim's part, right? And then the fancy
Mhm, yep,
pants guys, they can play like a fast reel underneath, and then you kinda blend them at the end of the medley, and it's like,
yeah,
but I feel like the reprise is one of those. And so I think these are all really cool ideas. That's the way I would look at all these. So I think you're seeing these tunes, right, that everybody's playing. But I don't think it's
mhm,
so much the tunes. I think it's the ideas. And you yourself
mm,
already kind of pointed out that the idea at the end of Clumsy Lover is incredible. And
yeah,
I'm sure it existed in other tunes before and that effect had been heard before. But like Clumsy Lover really harnessed that effect, you know, to use the high A's to allow those bottom hand notes to really stick out. It really used that idea, and for whatever reason, that idea caught fire. And so
yeah,
everybody was playing that tune, but you'll notice in the wake of Clumsy Lover, you also had a huge number of amazing tunes that utilize that effect. The Whitby Runaround comes to mind as one of those tunes that really used that to amazing effect. You can Google it. It would have been on the 78th Fraser's Live in Ireland album as well. Now, I'm pretty sure Clumsy Lover came first. My history is not actually that great. But, and then just generally speaking, there's a lot of tunes. Well, and then of course, Troy's Wedding, right? Where you have that effect. You have
yeah,
that tune. That probably came long before Clumsy Lover, right? And that's a cool
right,
tune, right? And that's a cool tune. But for whatever reason, Clumsy Lover came around and then it just caught fire. And
mm,
then Steam Train to Malag, right? That was the first, and then maybe it wasn't the first. I'm sure people who know their history better than me maybe can call me out on this. But Steam Train to Malag was the first bagpipe suite,
yeah,
okay, that really caught fire. Where it's, oh, wait, that's not just magic. I can do that. And that's
mhm,
great. And then, and then it's something that everybody can play, and it's actually very playable. Itchy Fingers, very playable,
yeah.
right? What else we got? What were our other big ones? I forget.
Well, Pumpkin's Fancy, I feel like is a pretty obvious example. And maybe that's another
Right.
one where you have a convention or an idea, that repeated slide thing, right?
Yep.
That surely it happened otherwise, but maybe that's where it really takes off, because I certainly can think of some other tunes as well with that one that since then also use that convention, but that's the first I was aware of that use
Yeah.
that convention.
In the way that natural selection works, these types of ideas also seem to work, right?
Mm,
It's very similar. So you'll have these mutations, people will have these cool ideas, right? But then, like, at a certain point, a certain combination of these ideas takes off and dominates and has that exponential growth curve, right? And I think you see that with all these other things.
mm,
Like, obviously, Aaron B. Minor was not the first medley reprise, but for whatever
mhm.
reason, right? It was in the right place at the right time, played by the right band.
And done well too. That's part of it surely as
Yeah,
well.
right. So it has to be the
Yeah,
right number. It has to be the right combination of things, I think.
yeah. Yeah, and it's I hesitate a bit too, even when trying to form the question, because I don't think to myself, "Oh, I wish that really great players would stop playing so amazingly because I want to be able to play everything that my heroes play." That's not it. No, I hope
Mm-mm.
that innovation continues, forever. I love being blown away, you know, by very talented players. And so then I also don't know, like, how much of this is just a tiny little slice of my own personal experience that maybe when I was a certain age, I thought I was more I'm now having an existential crisis live in front of you, Andrew.
It's okay.
Realizing that maybe that
You're
when I
just
was younger,
realizing you're just realizing that the previous 60 episodes, you've done the same thing. Yeah.
I've done the same thing every
Yeah.
time. Because 'Cause I'm thinking, well, when I was a teenager, maybe I just thought I had potential and that, like, when I heard something cool, I had time and energy and talent sufficient to eventually learn it, and maybe
No,
it's
I
just
don't
that
think
now
so.
in midlife, I'm like, "I'm gonna be dead before I get good enough to play that," you know?
No, I don't think so. I think that the innovations have shifted away from tunes, right? It seems like there's
Mm.
other things, well, another huge meme, for lack of a better word, in the pipe band world was the canister systems,
Oh,
right?
sure, yeah.
Like moisture control was not a new idea, but then Jeff Ross comes up with this tube thing. And at least where I was now, I think from the perspective of Jeff Ross, I think it took much longer. But at least from the perspective where I was, it swept the entire East Coast of the United States in 1 year. Like
Yeah,
1 year,
yeah.
everybody went from sheep to moisture control systems, just like that. And then, so that's not a tune, but that's something where it's like, oh, all of a sudden it's easy for everybody to never have any moisture again on their drones. That sounds nice. And the
Yeah.
synthetic drone reads are the same thing, right? And then, yeah, there's lots of cool, interesting ideas.
Maybe this is way too far out there, but it does occur to me too that, like, and maybe it's because I'm thinking of Lincoln Hilton in particular. And I hope it's always clear that I'm a massive fan. I'm not in any way trying to say that guy's just too good.
But,
I don't like him because he's
but,
so good. But the innovation of video duetting one's self,
mhm,
right? That's another, like, it's not the tune, but it definitely, whether that's bands putting together pieces during the pandemic lockdown stuff, like, that was super cool, and I'm so glad that that innovation had kind of already come into our community before that happened because it made for some very cool projects. But also,
yep,
I mean, Matt McIsaac has some really great stuff where he plays with he accompanies himself with guitar or doubles up with chanters or whistles or whatever, you know?
yep.
Shoot, now that I'm talking about it, I'm just thinking, yeah, pretty much every piper I can think of who has any kind of online presence does that to some degree or another. That feels like a thing. That's a thing that's kind of new to our community, right?
Sure. Well, I
Maybe.
think it's like time. I think it's timing as well. I mean, Robert Matheson was doing that stuff like in the late '80s.
Mm,
Multi-tracking himself and writing really cool
yeah.
tunes and, all that kind of stuff. He was doing that in the '80s. And by the way, it was pretty big in the '80s too. But
Mhm.
there does seem to be moments of takeoff, and it's difficult to predict when they're gonna be,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, because I feel like I don't have as good a grasp on it, but I feel like there was something in the water that was making for similar, by which I mean, like, I'm thinking of, like, Victoria Police and their Master Blasters album and, like, the band Brother, and, like, I was gonna say the Wicked Tinkers, maybe they're kind of like their own other thing too, right? I don't know, there's something about, like, a genre of, like, sort of like, dance hall rock anthem fusing with bagpipes that feels like
Yeah.
it's all also kind of like in a time period in, like, I don't know, mid '80s ish.
Yeah. They're all just ideas. And by the way, you'll notice that the ideas have to be accessible to the masses,
Yeah.
right? The good ideas have to be. Well, you know what? The most classic example's gotta be Amazing Grace, right?
Mm. The tune
Like,
it
the tune itself and the fact that
yeah,
bagpipers play it. At some
yeah.
point, somebody a long time ago, like before my generation, right? Somebody was like, "Oh, Amazing Grace is actually really playable on the pipes." And, some person just sort of played it in the right place at the right time, and I think it became well, and the Green Hills of Tyrol is another
Mm.
example. That's a tune you think is a pipe tune, but it's not. I don't think. I could be wrong about this. But you think it's a pipe tune, but it's not. It was adopted, and then it became like this meme, and everybody played it all over the place, and now you don't even realize it wasn't originally a pipe tune.
Yeah, I hesitate just a little bit. Just, I mean, anybody can feel free to tell me that I've got some stuff wrong here, but if I remember right, Amazing Grace, is based on an Appalachian tune, would have been like a fiddle tune called New Britain or Harmony Grove. and it didn't really show up on pipes. I believe it was 1974. It was at least close to the mid-70s that it was the Royal Scots Dragoon that put a take of Amazing Grace on an album that they put out. That ended up being a very popular album. I think it
Yeah.
might have actually been, like, the first bagpipe album to go platinum or hit the top 40 or something like that. And so it's only since the mid-70s, and, like, it was that album, as far as I know, that made anybody else go, "Oh, that fits on bagpipes? Cool, I guess I'll
Mhm.
try it." Whereas and for me personally today, anytime I get a call for a funeral gig, it's assumed that I will be playing Amazing Grace
Yeah.
because that's the assumption is bagpipes have been playing Amazing Grace at funerals for generations, right? They used to do this in Scotland, so we gotta do it here for grandma as well, you know? And
Yeah.
I'll do anything they ask, right? But yeah, it's just like we've taken it in stride as if it's always been this way. It's pretty recent.
Yeah, and it's just kind of really, really fascinating how that works, yeah.
Yeah.
I think your original question to me might have been,
Yeah, sorry, I'm getting distracted.
why aren't we seeing that anymore? And do you think that the era of these viral tunes is over? And my extremely long-winded discussion on this has been, no, I think it still goes on all the time. It's
Mm,
just not always in the form of like that flashy tune. I think there
mm,
was a there I think there was, or there may have just seemed to be to you and I because we learned around the same time. It
mm,
seemed to be an era where that was going on, but it's still going on.
mm,
And then, yeah, we're just in a different position now, right? Like
mm.
my dad wasn't, to my knowledge, obsessed with Clumsy Lover. He was playing pipes at the time I was learning, and we would go to band practice all the time. I thought Clumsy Lover was like the coolest thing in the world. My dad thought it was like mildly entertaining, but
Yeah.
maybe it's a little bit just the fact that that's when we were young that plays into that perception as well.
Mm,
I remember doing this as a kid, going up to people like Neil Dickey or something and just be like, "Wow, man, Clumsy Lover. Oh my God, dude. Oh, wow. It's just so amazing." I remember going up to a guy like Neil Dickey and having those kinds of conversations. And he was like, "Well, yeah, Clumsy Lover was like this thing that I did amongst many other things that I did." And yeah, it's just funny that it took off. And you're like, wait,
yeah.
what? You don't think? And when I joined the SFU pipe band, it was always that. It was like, oh my God, 1995 medley. Oh, and then the Alive in America album, greatest album of all time. They're like,
Yeah.
really? That's just a concert we did one time. And so anyway, that kind of thing, right? And then now it's young kids will come up to me and say stuff like that, you know,
Yeah.
oh my God, I listened to this one thing you did on repeat all the time. And I was like, wow, that's so interesting. I had no idea. First of all, I had no idea people were aware of that and liked it. But then, yeah, it's just kind of a weird thing. So I think there's probably all of that going on
Yeah.
as well. I think
No,
it's a cyclical thing.
that's a good point. As you were describing that, it occurred to me too that and this had not occurred to me before, that, like, sometimes a lot of the stuff that we're talking about where we, like, are distilling defining characteristics of small pockets of time, often you can't do that in that moment. You actually need some distance from that
That's
moment
right.
to look back and go, "Oh, that's when this thing was happening."
Oh, 100%. So the future is completely unpredictable, you know? As a matter of fact, having been involved in the Air and B minor thing, I remember that vividly. Like,
Yeah.
oh, this might be a huge risk and this thing's gonna flop. There's a good chance this thing's gonna flop and no one's gonna like it.
It was super cool, though. I went
I would just
went
point out that just sort of accidentally, I think it kind of went beyond that. It became something where a lot of people are like, whoa, what was that?
Yes.
And then it kind of took off. And, in SFU, we did several more reprise medleys because it was super fun to do. But then other
Mhm.
bands started to do it. And now it's
Yeah.
weird. It's almost weird if a band doesn't do it now,
It's well, yeah, especially if you get to, top level bands, yeah, and
at
you
least in
kinda do
some
expect it.
way, right? Yeah. So at least in some
It still
way.
gets my blood pumping, though. It's still pretty exciting every time I hear it, so I'm not tired of it yet. Keep it coming.
And what's cool about the reprise, and maybe the reason to your point originally, maybe it's the fact that it is playable by everyone is the
Mm,
appeal. The reprise is especially great because even in a beginner band, right? You've got 3 or 4 hot shots. So they can play the fast bit and then everyone else can play the slow bit and you can achieve a great effect. Or in the opinion of some, a really cheesy effect. But it's
right,
still
sure.
fun. But it's still fun, yeah.
That is an interesting point. The convergence of coolness, but still doableness, maybe is an important
Yeah.
ingredient.
And then is that true across the board, not just in piping? And I think the answer is yes. Like,
Mm.
why was like Lord of the Rings the greatest, especially the first one? Why was that like the greatest thing anyone has ever seen in their whole life? It was the coolest. I never even heard of the Lord of the Rings before. Well, that's not really true. I'd heard of it and I just thought it was like this silly thing. And then my buddy was like, dude, we're seeing Lord of the Rings later. You want to come? And I was like, I don't have anything better to do. That was basically my response. And then at the end of the movie, I just remember that
Wiping tears away.
that was the
The
greatest
most
thing I've
amazing
ever
thing.
seen in my life. But what did Peter Jackson do there? He took this really cool story and it was just so followable,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like and he probably, I mean, I'm sure every film director hopes they get that, but I bet you by the time you're at that level, you're not expecting it and you just do your
Mm.
best to make a film and then there it is. It was
So
like
it's
the
maybe an
right
even
place at the
better
right time.
maybe a better word than doability is accessibility. It's really cool and accessible.
Yeah. Well, all of like the DNA, all the details of the DNA is like perfectly right for the environment. And I mean, take a guy like Neil Dickey. He wrote countless tunes that are way better than Clumsy Lover,
Mm,
right? At least
yeah.
arguably way better. And
And
I
he probably
bet you
spent a lot
Neil
more
would even
time
agree.
working on them too.
Yeah. I don't know
Yeah.
for sure. Someday we can have Neil on, maybe. That'd be fun. But I bet you he would even agree. Oh, this tune was
Mm,
better. This tune was better. This tune was better. But for whatever reason, Clumsy Lover fit the piping landscape perfectly at the time. To the point where Clumsy Lover is such a great tune that most people assume it's traditional, that it's been
yeah,
played
that
for
it's always
hundreds of
been there.
years. But
Yeah.
it's not. Not even
So
close.
not.
Like, it's not even to my knowledge, I could be wrong about any of this today, but to my knowledge, that's not even inspired by an old tune. I think he just wrote
Yeah.
that thing.
Yeah. It's funny, speaking of the Lord of the Rings, I'm sure you've heard the lore that Tolkien just on a whim wrote the first lines of The Hobbit on a blank piece of paper while he was grading one night. And then what that turned into is so huge, right? You
Yeah.
imagine Neil Dickey working for hours on so many other tunes and being
Oh,
like, this is a
totally.
great tune, working so hard. And then Clumsy Lover, while he's eating lunch one day, scribbles it on a napkin, throws it off in the corner, and for some reason it just takes off.
Yeah. And that's totally how it works, right? By the way, it's usually, I don't know how you met your wife, but it's usually how it happens in life, right? It's like usually the moments when you're not trying to find a girlfriend that you like, you know, that you just meet that person or something, and it's the same with tunes
Yeah.
and the same with creativity. It's like usually you just have this idea and you're like, that's cool. And then you just naturally take the next step and the next step. And then, you know, Neil probably wrote out Clumsy Lover and he's, that's kind of cool. Like I'll send it over to a couple people and see if they like it. And then
Yeah.
it just goes crazy, right?
Yeah, Ross Ainsley once said something about how he feels like what he tries to do is just always have his antennas up, and that if
Yeah.
his antennas are up, cool stuff will happen.
Yep. I think
Cool
that's probably
philosophy
exactly right.
for creativity. Yeah.
Yep. And maybe the reason George R. R. Martin still hasn't written, what is it, A Song of Ice and Fire or whatever the next book is supposed to be, like, maybe it's because he's not doing that anymore and
Mm.
he's kind of lost in the soup and he's not just, writing cool stuff down. Come on, George.
Might
That's
be
all I
too
have to
much
say
of
about
a
that.
I'm trying to make this happen situation rather than letting it happen.
Possibly. Yeah.
Maybe.
I also think it's way harder to end a super epic
Surely.
fantasy series than begin one,
He's
because
got
it
so
goes out
good
and
at
then it has
killing
to.
people off, you'd think it'd be easy enough to just finish them all off and put the end, right?
Right. Yeah. But yeah, it's very funny. I think that viral phenomenon in piping is the same as elsewhere. I think it's the ideas more than I think it's the idea more than the fact
Mm,
that it's a tune that's
yeah.
relevant.
No, I hadn't thought of that. That's a very and I think you're right, it makes a lot of sense.
And then I also think that there's an age where you care a lot about these things, right?
Yeah.
So if there's kids that were whatever age we were when we were playing Clumsy Lover, if there are kids now at that age, they could probably tell you all that cool stuff that we don't realize yet is gonna be the next big thing.
A good reminder to not discard the youths,
Yeah.
right? They've got a
Oh,
good
for sure.
sense for what's cool.
Yeah, and, you get into your comfort zone and you think you know things,
Yeah.
but you don't.